So today I want to go over an Abattoir of Zir ready pulverized build for the Druid. Now there's quite a lot of ways you can play pulverized Druids, and this is going to be kind of your base pulverized Druid that's not using Grizzly Rage. But I still want to do different builds, going over different ways to play a Druid build like this, especially ones using Grizzly Rage. Now with this version of a pulverized Druid, we're going to be using two different uniques which are both very important. And I think the most important is Banish Lord's Talisman. After spending 300 of your primary resource, your next core skill is guaranteed to overpower. We have a bunch of ways to guarantee overpowers, so this is just another, but those are very important because the second effect of this is your crits that also overpower deal up to 120% increased multiplicative damage. So until you get super high into the Abattoir of Zir, if you crit overpower something, it's pretty much dead. You're going to one-shot all elites that you crit overpower, and you can sometimes deal like half the health of all of the Bloodseeker bosses in the Abattoir of Zir on a crit overpower. So that's one of the main things you're fishing for in this build. Now the other unique is Tibalt's Will. This is going to be very important for resource generation. So you deal up to 40% increased multiplicative damage while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, which will be all the time. And when you become unstoppable, gain 50 of your primary resource. And we have a bunch of ways to become unstoppable, so this will be procced a lot. And that brings us to our skill tree, starting with our generator, which is going to be Wind Shear. Now once you get higher into the Abattoir of Zir, you're going to need to use this more and more, but once you're at lower tiers, you're primarily just throwing this in every once in a while to proc some effects. Upgrade 1 can make enemies vulnerable. Upgrade 2 gives you increased movement speed. Now the increased movement speed is nice for moving around, but you don't necessarily need to use this a bunch to stack up that movement speed. Then we're going down 5 points into Pulverize, our main damaging ability. It just fills a whole screen with a massive amount of damage. Upgrade 1 will cause your next overpower after 12 seconds of being healthy to be a guaranteed overpower. And then upgrade 2 makes enemies deal less damage after being hit by Pulverize. Then we're going down, we're taking Blood Howl, which is going to be a big heal, which is actually going to be useful. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown by 1 second per kill, and upgrade 2 generates 20 spirit, another way where we're going to be able to generate a lot of spirit. And this is also going to shapeshift you, which is going to be important for a bunch of other effects. Then we have Debilitating Roar, which is just going to be a massive damage reduction to all enemies. Upgrade 1 fortifies you. Upgrade 2 slows enemies. Now this is going to help with some of our other effects, especially damage versus CC'd enemies, but if you feel like you need more healing, which you probably won't, you can also go Preserving Debilitating Roar to heal you quite a lot for the entirety of its duration. Then we're going down, we're taking Trample, which is going to be one of the ways we get unstoppable. Upgrade 1 makes you deal more damage the less enemies there are. Upgrade 2 grants you 40 spirit, another really good way to generate a lot of spirit. And if you proc Tibalt's Will with Trample, you'll get 40 spirit plus the 40 spirit from Tibalt's Will, so you'll basically completely fill up your spirit by using one Trample. Then we're going down, our ultimate's going to be Petrify, which stuns all enemies within range, which is really good for non-boss enemies. This also works on Bloodseekers in the Abattoir of Zir because they're not considered bosses, so this is actually really good against those. You always want to make sure you have Petrify up when the Bloodseekers are spawning. It also makes you deal increased critical strike damage against those enemies hit. And then we're going down taking the Urzine Strength Capstone. Gain 20% additional health while in werebear form and for 3 seconds after, and this is a multiplicative health, so this will be massive health increase. While healthy, you deal 25% increased multiplicative damage and deal 25% multiplicative increased overpower damage. So everything about this is incredibly strong for this build. And then we have our passives. 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses. Your core skills cost more but deal massively increased damage. 3 into Predatory Instinct for increased critical strike chance. 3 into Iron Fur for damage reduction while in werebear and for 3 seconds after. Then 3 into Ancestral Fortitude, increased resistances. 3 into Vigilance for damage reduction after using a defensive. Then 3 into Nature's Reach, deal increased damage to distant enemies and double this if they're CC'd. Then we're going down, 3 into Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies. 1 into Safeguard, where crits with your Earth skills will fortify you. You actually need quite a lot of Fortify when you're getting into the Abattoir of Zir. Then 3 into Stone Guard. While you have Fortify over 50% of your max life, your Earth skills deal more damage. Now with this version of the build, we're not going into Mending and Provocation because we're not using the unique chest piece that keeps us in werebear at all times, but in other version of this build will probably be using this. Then we're going down, 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal more damage to elites. 3 into Natural Disaster. Your Earth skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Your core skills deal more damage to CC'd enemies. Then 3 into Resonance. Nature skills deal increased damage. Triple this if an Earth skill is the next cast after a Storm skill. This is also another one of the reasons we're using a Storm Generator. So whenever you do a Storm skill, an Earth skill, or vice versa, you'll deal massively increased damage, but you actually don't do that as much as I thought I initially would, just because of how much resource generation we have. Then finally, 1 additional point into Circle of Life, nature skills that consume spirit, heal you for 1% of your max life, just some additional healing. Then we have our spirit boons, 1 into awareness, take reduced damage from elites, sight talents for increased critical strike chance, iron fur for massively increased life. In fact, with this build just standing here, we have a little over 21,000 life, which will increase when in combat. Then we're taking bolster. Anytime we use a defensive, we fortify ourselves for 15% of our max life. Again, we need a lot of fortify for the Abattoir of Zir. Then finally, Obsidian Slam. Every 20th kill with an earth skill will be a guaranteed overpower, just another way we can cause overpowers. Then we have our Vampiric Powers, starting with Undying. Casting a skill heals you for 3% of your life, double this below 50%. This is our main way we sustain and heal. Metamorphosis, which will cause us to be unstoppable, deal some damage to enemies in our paths, but the main reason we want this is to become unstoppable. Now, one thing to note is that when Metamorphosis is mixed with Tibalt's Will, which will grant you primary resource, you can't just spam out Metamorphosis and keep overlapping the Fortify. That won't grant you the primary resource effect from Tibalt's Will. If you haven't leveled up your Metamorphosis yet, don't do it, because leveling up Metamorphosis increases the duration of Unstoppable, which means it's actually worse to level up Metamorphosis when using Tibalt's Will. Mine is leveled up, so you just kind of have to play around having 4 seconds Unstoppable from 1 to Metamorphosis. You kind of just have to time it out to be able to keep gaining more resources from Tibalt's Will. Then we're taking Blood Boil. When your core skill overpowers, you spawn these 3 orbs you can pick up for some additional damage, but every 20 seconds your next skill is guaranteed to be overpower, just another way we cause guaranteed overpowers. Then Prey on the Weak, deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Then Sanguine Brace, when you kill an enemy you fortify for 6% of your base life. This is pretty good, but the most important reason we're taking this one is while you have fortify more than half of your max life, you gain 8% increased crit chance. And because this build is so focused on crit overpowering, this is going to be really good and a pretty massive damage increase. And then next up we have our Paragon Boards. Now I'm primarily going to be going over the glyph and board selection, but there'll be a build planner in the description if you want to follow point by point. And this Paragon Board selection is a base one that a lot of pulverized druids use, but I do think there's probably going to be some big changes for future builds. There's definitely a bunch of stuff I want to try out to see if I can optimize these boards a little bit. But our starter board is going to be Shapeshifter, which is a buff to all rare nodes within range, so we get some additional damage, some resistances. But the secondary effect is a shapeshifting has a 20% chance to cause the skill's damage to critically strike. So just basically an increased chance for our next pulverize to crit when shapeshifting. And because we have Bloodhound, which shapeshifts us into Werewolf, and then our other skills which shapeshifts us into Werebear, this will proc quite a bit just for more crits. Then we're going up, we're taking Inner Beast. After shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% for 5 seconds up to 30%. This will be procced a majority of the time. The glyph we're taking is Dominate, which increases your overpower. Then the secondary effect is when you overpower an enemy, all damage you take from you is increased by 12% for 5 seconds. And this gives a pretty absurd increase to your overpower damage. Then we're going up, we're taking the Ancestral Guidance board. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds, so big damage increase. And the glyph we're taking is Outmatch, another buff to rare nodes within range, so we get pretty big core skill damage, more resist to all. And then the secondary effect is you deal pretty massively increased physical damage to non-elites and bosses. Then we're going back down, we're going over, we're taking the Earthen Devastation board. Your Earth skills deal increased critical strike damage, and this is increased by your damage versus crowd controlled up to 40%. I'm currently at 26% because I don't have a best in slot rolled weapon. One of the main ways you max this out is to have a two-handed staff, which we're using, and have a damage versus crowd controlled roll on that weapon. So it's going to be a way I can optimize even more. And the glyph we're taking is Werebear. Increased damage while in Werebear, damage reduction while in Werebear. Then we're going over, we're taking the Survival Instinct board. While in Werebear form, you deal increased damage up to 50% for every 1% difference in current life between you and the enemy. So if you're say 100% and you're getting an enemy lower and lower, you'll keep dealing more and more damage to them. And the glyph we're taking is Exploit, increased vulnerable damage. The main reason we're taking this is when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This is the main way you apply vulnerable to all enemies instantly. Finally, we're going up, we're taking the Constricting Tendril boards, but we're only taking the glyph, which is Earth and Sky, a buff to all magic nodes within range, and this will give us increased max life, which is going to be really good for this build, increased nature magic damage, and the secondary is nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. And another reason you take glyphs like this is so you can put some additional points into the secondary stats, so intelligence or dexterity, to get the secondary effect of a lot of the rare nodes throughout the board. And then next up we have our legendary aspects and our gems. On your weapon you want overpower damage, on your gear you want max life, and then on your jewelry to start off you want to make sure you have capped out resistance resistances. So use whatever gems you need to cap out your resistances. I have 5% resistance to all elements on all pieces of my jewelry, which caps out my resistances. If you don't need another resistance gem, just use a skull gem for more armor. And we already went over our 2 uniques for this build, but for our legendary aspects, the primary one you're going to need is on a 2-handed weapon. Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing up to 200% of its damage to targets in the path. So Pulverize is normally a small AoE in front of you, but now it fills a whole screen with massively increased damage, but it doesn't remove that initial Pulverize the normal Pulverize does. So now you basically have 2 effects of Pulverize, the small AoE around you and the one that fills the whole screen. This means if you're in the correct range, you can hit a target with both of the damage effects of Pulverize. And then for our other offensive aspects, we want casting a storm skill grants your earth skills 45% increased crit strike damage, and casting an earth skill increases your crit for your storm skills. This is another reason why we use wind shear. This is something I would actually like to change if I could, because I don't enjoy the combat of having to cast a generator in between pulverizes and stuff. So that's definitely something for a future build I may try out. Then your core skills do up to 40% increased damage based on your fortify. I need to get an actual good roll of this, but just a massive damage boost. Then on our gloves, Pulverize is now an earth skill, and after casting Pulverize, it makes a little damage over time on the ground. And the main reason we're using this is so Pulverize is an earth skill, so it gets a bunch of other scaling. Then for our defensive aspects, you want Disobedience. This gives you % armor stacking, basically required in all builds. Then on my chest, I have basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. Again, another reason we would use Wind Shear to keep this proc. Now there are definitely builds that are using the unique chest piece where you stay in Werebear at all times, and all of your Werebear skills have increased ranks to them. That chest piece is actually decently rolled. Currently, I'm using this so I get more damage reduction for the Abattoir of Zir, but I'll definitely be doing another build with the unique chest piece. Then on our boots, while unstoppable and 4 seconds after, you gain increased movement speed and can freely move through enemies. This is just so you have better movement speed and you don't get trapped as much. Now this may be something I change out for the legendary aspect where your earth skills slow all enemies, so all enemies are guaranteed CC'd. So either one of those you want is going to be good. I'm currently using this just because it gives you the better movement, and I'm currently not pushing super high into the Abattoir of Zir. And then finally, we have our gear stats. On our helmet, you want willpower, total armor, max life, cooldown reduction. You want all of those. And then basically any other defensive stats going to be good on your helm. On your chest, you want all defensive stats, damage reduction from close enemies, from distant, damage reduction while fortified. I have poisoned on here, which really doesn't help me, but just all damage reduction on your chest is going to be good. On your gloves, you want willpower, critical strike chance, ranks to pulverize, and then basically any other damage roll, overpower damage, critical strike damage, any of those are going to be good. Then on your boots, you want move speed and spirit cost reduction are going to be the main ones. I like going for more defensives on my boots, so damage reduction while injured is very good, and then a dodge chance roll is also really good. On your weapon, you want willpower, you want core skill damage, you do want a damage to crowd controlled roll on the weapon, and you do want to be using a staff, so it's implicit is also damage to crowd controlled enemies. If you get the affix roll for damage to crowd controlled enemies, you should be able to cap out the legendary node from your Paragon boards. I've rolled this weapon a ridiculous amount of times. I wasn't able to get that. And then some additional rolls you can get is all stats, overpower, vulnerable damage, any other damage roll is going to be good. Then on our rings, you want critical strike damage, physical damage, max life, and then resource generation is also going to be really good. That's pretty much your best rolls for your rings. But that's the entirety of this pulverized druid for the build. This is very strong. You can do Abattoir of Zir pretty easily, especially the first couple levels, even if you're not optimally rolled. I'm definitely not optimized at all because pulverize is one of the least used builds I've used in the season, but definitely going to start using it more, so future versions of pulverized builds should be a bit more optimized. But even being unoptimized, this build can still allow you to farm Abattoir of Zir very easily. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.